The following video is a video about trans issues. Well, it's not really about the issues themselves, it's about an idea that I had regarding trans issues, regarding the biology of it. But I recently spoke to, admittedly just one person, but I still want to learn from that experience, who has a sibling who is trans. And we were talking about it, and I wanted to put forward the fact that I thought that we should all try to be as intellectually honest as possible in any debate. And I could sense from that person that they were getting more and more upset at me and were, I think, conflating my desire to try to make a change or bring a solution as an expression of non-support towards dysphoria and what it is to be trans and what it means to have to face up to that situation. And I was trying to impress upon this person that that's not what I was getting at, that I felt like a lot of people in the world who don't believe that trans is a problem will require a biological solution. And this person was telling me that they were like, I think everybody should just have the right to do what they want. And in my mind, this rings true. This sounds like a great idea, but frequently doing what you want means that you are imposing your own will on other people, and we all affect one another. And in this case, when we're talking about transitioning, there is an element of transitioning as a child. This person was trying to be as pragmatic as possible. So what do you do? What rights do you say? Like, what's the process? What age should we say yes and no? And I was trying to say, I don't know, because I don't have a biological solution, and because I'm not trans myself. And so what I think trans biology research will do is, one, it will convince the people who don't believe that it's a thing at all, who don't believe that testimony is even equal to data, who don't believe that, as this person was reminding me, that people who transition seem to all feel much better once they've done so. This to me is data. I brought up detransitioning because I had heard of certain cases, and to me, even if those cases are inflated by people who don't want transitioning to be a thing at all because it conflicts with their worldview, I still think we always must be intellectually honest, because there is nothing to be afraid of. If you are feeling what you feel, any research will corroborate what you say, any honest research. And so that's what you must not be afraid of. If we're all afraid of searching because we're afraid of bias, then we don't lean into the search. And therefore, if you're half in, half out of the search, like you got one step in the camp of like, ooh, maybe we shouldn't do this because feelings should be enough, and people seem to be happy, and we should focus on rights and politics, and you got the other foot that's in the camp, well, maybe we should do a bit of research. The thing is that you won't, whatever research you get will be like one study, two studies, and that's not enough. If you really want to satisfy all parties, especially the parties that will try to put barriers in the way of medical transitioning procedures that are, it would appear, necessary to solve the problem. This following idea that I'm going to express is about helping to resolve the differences between those who believe the trans is an issue and those who believe that it's not. And it has nothing to do with trying to undermine the message that it is true that trans people exist. And what's more, as a person, if you came to me and you were struggling for any reason, I wouldn't start with, but biologically, what evidence is there that I would obviously focus on comforting you and focus on being there for you. And that's what I choose to do as a musician and as a human being. So me having this idea that I want to help people in the logical research, medical biological search way does not mean that I don't also feel for the person and can compartmentalize my curiosity when the need arises. So I just wanted to make that clear because that's what I learned from that person and the fact that they seem to be getting emotional. And I felt like I needed to tread a little more lightly and to put a caveat to the following idea. And so I hope that that was clear enough. So here's the video, and if you don't want to watch it, that's totally fine. Have a beautiful day and take care. And so, despite how the biologists seem to say that the creation process of a man or a woman is still binary in the creation, the actual creation process, it would still involve distributing a certain amount of characteristics. And the question would then be, how are the characteristics distributed?
Yes, 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 yes! Oh, come on! Yes! Damn!
Hello and welcome to another video. I don't know how loud this is. I'm a little bit sick today, so I apologize for that. I hate not feeling productive, so there's days when I feel like I've got to do something. I'm a musician. I normally play music, but I wanted to do one of my talk-in videos. Today I wanted to talk about trans people. And I'm not saying that like, oh, I want to talk about something that I don't know anything about. You know, I come from a perspective of a person who I want to solve problems. A little side note, so this may be a shocker, but I have a mental illness. I have a disease called schizophrenia that I got a few years ago. And I think that in part the need to create delusions in my head came from a dissatisfaction with my place in the world and the level of attention that I was getting. You know, we all feel like we want to leave our mark on the world, and I think that in part I wanted to feel special, and so I created delusions of grandeur in order to feel special. One of the reasons why I want to talk about this kind of stuff is that I keep watching these videos about people arguing about these debates. Could it be a debate? It could be a debate about, you know, God or atheism. It could be a debate about, you know, right-wing or left-wing politics, or anything really, just like anything philosophical, anything political, anything that requires thought in order to understand, anything that's a problem that you can try to solve. And so the trans debate is one of those problems. So not trans people, okay, not trans people, trans debate. The trans debate is a problem, in my opinion, that we need to solve. And I get the feeling that people are going around in circles. One side says one thing and the other side says another thing. In fact, there's two sides, and it's very hard sometimes to see that there could be in the future some middle ground that we might agree on, or that we could actually get to a solution. And the following idea is an idea that I feel like I have to get out in order to try to bring the debate to a close, because it is a debate and there is a solution. As far as I can tell, there are two main sides on this trans debate. The first side is the side that is relating back to us their experience, which is the trans side, the people who are saying, I feel like I have this condition, gender dysphoria. It shows that I am in fact deep down a woman, where my body shows that I'm a man, and or the vice versa for the other gender, the other sex. I still use the word sex in the sense of the biologically, you know, the word sex for me could mean gender, because I assume that I'm a naive human being on this. I'm assuming that I'm not a biologist, but I also don't pretend, despite the fact that I'm not a biologist, that I know a tiny bit of biology, but I don't like pretending like I know more biology than I do actually know. So I prefer going with what I can see, what I can perceive, what I'm hearing. And when some biologists are doing the work and I feel like they're somewhat trustworthy, then I would listen to them. So I'm going to use the word sex just interchangeably with gender, just for the idea of man and woman, and start with this basic principle. So we have this one side of the trans people that are saying we are trans, and then there's this other side, which is the people who disagree, who say, no, you're not. So it sounds pretty simple, but the reality, I think, is that despite our best efforts so far, we haven't been able to find a biological explanation for the data, which I would consider it data, anecdotes, the testimony of all the trans people that are saying this is what we feel. First of all, I think it's important to remember that when someone says that they feel something, it's usually not a good sign to go, no, I don't think you're feeling that, because you are one person removed from the feelings of others. So if someone's saying that they're feeling something, it's unwise, at least it's bad practice, to look at them and go, I don't believe you. I don't believe that you say that you're feeling this. So imagine if someone said, I'm scared, and you didn't say, oh, stop being a sissy, right? Because you could say that, stop being a sissy, I don't think you should be scared, because this situation is not a scary one. That's one situation. But this other situation is basically if someone said, I'm scared, and they go, no, I don't think you're really feeling scared. To me, that sounds very illogical. It sounds very strange to say that, you know, like, no, I don't think you're actually feeling scared. I think what you're really feeling is actually your body. It's a hard sell to say, well, I think that these people are not truthful because what they're saying is not what they're actually feeling. I'm not comfortable with people being so comfortable on the one side of the debate, the people who are disagreeing that there's such a thing as trans, just being comfortable just dismissing people's feelings just like that and going, well, they must be feeling something that we already understand and experience. Now, this is an important point. When you have a theory, it's usually based on an assumption. So you assume something, and then in science, what you do is you create a question, which is called, in a fancy way, it's called a hypothesis, but it's really just a question. Is this what's happening? And then you explore. Usually you test things. Testing means engaging with the environment. So if it's with a question regarding people, it means going up to the people, asking them, or if it's a question regarding biology, in this case, it would be using certain biological procedures to try things out and see what works and see what comes back and see how it all fits with the things that we already know, or that we are more or less certain of. And the problem, I think, is that in this debate, what's happening, and this is a frequent thing that happens in many debates, is that people don't update their assumptions. The important thing to remember is you must update your assumptions. When you find new data, you don't try to interpret that data automatically, at least. You don't automatically assume that data needs to be interpreted according to your previous assumption. You update your assumption based on the data. And the data seems to be, there are lots of people that are saying, we feel this way. And the first reaction of most people who work in biology, or who are uncomfortable with the fact that it might be getting complicated, or at least slightly more complicated than we originally imagined, is to just go, no, I'm going to interpret their behavior based on stuff that we already know can happen. Now, this can happen, but why has no one given any thought to the other possibility, which is that this is a new phenomenon? I mean, obviously, some people probably have given thought to this, but why is it not very clear to everyone involved? Well, they could be mentally ill, or they could be struggling in their life, or they could be interpreting their own emotions wrong, but they could also be correct, or they could also be onto something. They could be interpreting something wrong, but of a real feeling. And I think it's our duty to engage with both of those possibilities. Now, my hunch is that a movement like this would not have lasted this long. The core movement, at least. I'm not talking about necessarily the offshoot movements, which is, wanting to define a certain amount of genders. Like, there are 80 genders, or we need all these flags. And so that, to me, that seems like a psychological response to being rejected for what you believe. And I think we can separate the actual biological feeling that trans people might be feeling, and what I would call, I hesitate to call it that, but it's kind of a religion. Perhaps if I'm lenient, a psychological, cultural blanket that helps to tie in the feeling, the biological feeling, But I'd like to talk specifically to scientists. And I'm not really interested in engaging politically with either side, because I think that both of the sides that are willing to be active about this, willing to be activists, have already made up their mind and are not really looking to learn and not really looking to understand this phenomenon, with a few exceptions. I'd say there might be a few exceptions. I could think of maybe Jordan Peterson or something like that, that seems to, despite the fact that I don't think he's expressing himself really wisely. I think that he's had a lot of run-ins with people who are adamant about their positions, and so he's become more adamant about his, and I think that's starting to get a bit, I think it's becoming unwise. But despite all that, I still feel like Jordan Peterson, if you don't know Jordan Peterson, he's a psychologist, originally a clinical psychologist from Canada, and he got famous because he was fighting back against a policy in Canada, and now he's become a sort of figure that talks about all these, just about everything that has to do with culture or psychology or religion. And I disagree with some of what he says, and I agree with some of what he says, but on average, on the trans debate, I feel like he seems to be looking for an answer, and that's my point. Some people, despite their activism and how they're engaged politically, culturally in this debate, are actually trying to find the answer and are actually trying to learn. And so I would be talking to those people as well. My idea for me is a pretty simple idea, but it does involve some math, and I'm not the best at math quite yet. I'm really good, I feel, with concepts. I know this is not very convincing. I'm sorry, I apologize. I hope that you're convinced enough to at least listen a little further. I'm not an expert. I also don't have a solid grasp of the basics, so I have to always go back and check the basics. So the following idea is based on a very basic mathematical concept, but I'm not very comfortable with it, and so I need to qualify the next segment of what I'm about to say with that. So forgive me if I make a mistake or if I express myself poorly, but I do think that the core idea does have some value, and I really need to get it out because I think that it can actually solve the trans issues, the trans debate. I know this sounds weird, oh, this guy thinks he has all the solutions, but you never know. Maybe it's the solution. And if it was, I would have felt stupid not sharing it. And worst case, it's not. And it's just another video, but hell, let's go. This would be a theory that I would call, if there's not already some kind of theory that already exists that has this kind of basis to it in biology, but I would want to call this the theory or the hypothesis of mathematical sexual permutation. The idea of permutation in mathematics is that you have a series of objects and they are ordered in a certain fashion, and you can order them in a certain amount of ways. The idea of how many ways you can order them in is called permutation. The theory is then this. I would hypothesize, I would put forward the idea that, to me, the most striking definition of a man and a striking definition of a woman is a set of characteristics that emerges somehow from our bodies. Now, I say somehow because I don't exactly know how, because I'm not a biologist. But what I can see is that men have certain characteristics and women have certain characteristics on average, which means that you can find men and women who don't have all of the archetypal, the stereotypical characteristics of their supposed gender. And so you can find men that maybe don't have a square jaw as all the other men, and they're still a man, And you can also have a woman who has maybe who doesn't have as wide a hips as the typical woman might have. And so you can find these characteristics are seemingly on a sort of gradient of their own in how they express themselves and how they develop themselves. And so despite how the biologists seem to say that the creation process of a man or a woman is still binary in the actual creation process, it would still involve distributing a certain amount of characteristics. And the question would then be, how are the characteristics distributed? I also want to make another distinction, the distinction between a body characteristics and the characteristics of the creation of a brain. The brain being somewhat of a fantastical organ. There's a lot of connections in the brain, and it's quite an impressive organ to create. And there are certain sets of characteristics that it would appear when we look at the typical man or the typical woman baby, even at birth, they seem to display those characteristics. This I've seen multiple times. I've seen multiple studies, multiple documentaries, multiple people, multiple experts seemingly talk about this stuff. And so if we operate under this assumption, it's not too far-fetched to imagine that there could be a few case scenarios where if the creation of a baby is composed of independent events, so it's important that the events are independent events involving the distribution of characteristics, that there might be a few case scenarios that exist where the average characteristic distribution for the brain might be the opposite set of characteristics, male or female wise, than the average distribution of characteristics for the body for that same human being. And that seems to me a perfectly reasonable mathematical possibility, and it involves the idea of independent events. So an independent event would be, for instance, my name is Josh, I work in the production line, and I don't worry about what Barry is doing over there. I'm just doing my own thing, and I'm creating my own part of the car, and Barry is doing his own part of the car. And it doesn't matter who's doing what. I'm going to do mine, Barry's going to do his, and doesn't matter what Barry chooses to do. I will not base my behavior off Barry's. A non-independent event, a dependent event, would be the opposite. Would be Barry starts doing something different, and I look at Barry and I'm like, hey, Barry, I see that you're creating a woman part. We were supposed to make a man part. And I'd be like, okay, I think I'm going to adapt what Barry's doing, and I'm going to create a woman part too, to just go along with what Barry's doing and to not create too much dysphoria, I suppose you could call it. I'm not trying to make fun. It's just I don't know the word. Too much chaos, I suppose. Chaos is a bit strong, right? Too much tension. I'm being an idiot. I apologize. You know, there is tension in this debate, in this video. I do want to be respectful. And so an independent event would be, in fact, genetically, would be the baby starts getting conceived, and then there are events that happen, and if a mutation occurs in one set of events, there is another set of events which is independent from that set, which will not adapt to the mutation. And my question is, how many events are there? How many different sets of events are there that will be independent from one another, which would allow for this opportunity of a rare individual with, for the brain, where the average distribution of characteristics is of one sex, when the body, for that same human being, the body's average distribution of characteristics would be for the opposite sex, for that same human being. This should be a possibility given a certain amount of independent events. Now, what's more, I think we can be actually mathematical about this. Where a few years ago we couldn't sequence a genome, now a few years later, we got this 23andMe websites that can tell you the general gist of your ancestry thanks to cheap genome sequencing. I think that in a few years, we might be able to create a theoretical distribution of characteristics, general characteristics maybe, of different human beings, if we were so inclined to do the research, and be able to tell how many and predict how many human beings of a certain generation will have which characteristics, without obviously talking about the mutations that we can't really predict, that we haven't seen before. But if we're talking about mutations that we have seen before, or the likelihood of a certain mutation occurring, or of a certain characteristic existing, I think that can happen in the next few years, and we can do this thanks to the theory of permutation. Now, I know that it's probably not that simple. There's probably things that I'm not taking into account because I'm not an expert. And so I would like to, obviously put that forward, that, humbly, that I don't know really what I'm talking about. But I feel like that idea is key. I did speak to a young biologist about this idea, and she wasn't an expert at all in that domain. And she told me that we weren't yet capable of doing what I said I was putting forward. She said that it was too complicated,
and that it was unlikely we were going to be able to figure something out. But I said maybe in the future we will be. So I'm putting the idea out there. How many independent events of creation are there? And if we can figure that out, we can probably figure out the mathematical permutation of sexual distribution. My name is Kieranlecam. I hope you're having a beautiful day. Take care.